My DMs are an absolute mess. It's not bad. It's just that there's so many questions all of the time being asked about how to start in this line of work of street photography. And so I try and answer as many as I possibly can, but it's just getting to the point now where it's too much for me to individually keep answering all of these questions. So I've made a guide. I've made a full video and a full article about how to start street photography. Ta-da! Everybody's asking the same sort of questions. I'm just gonna make a guide and call it the unofficial complete guide to starting street photography. So buckle up, this is gonna take a minute. Hi, my name is Jared Thomas Tapey. I'm a social documentary photographer and educator here in New York City, and you're watching my YouTube channel. Across my social media platforms, I've created 6 different segments, each of which pertain to certain aspects in photography: crafting a photograph, life through the lens, marks of the maker, the creative connection, tools of the trade, and field notes. Today's lesson is going to be from my segment, Crafting a Photograph. The series dedicated to just taking you from taking pictures to crafting a photograph with your own unique vision and voice. Now, the first one that I want to start on, I'm taking each of these by segment, right? I think that the one that I get asked the most about is the fear and psychology of shooting. And I think across the board, the number one question within this category is, how do I get over the fear of photographing strangers? Let me tell you something that nobody told me when I first started doing this, and I had those same exact fears as you do right now. The anxiety that you feel, the fear that you feel, it really doesn't go away. There's still moments where I feel that anxiousness, that what if moment. That's always going to be there. However, the thing that does change is your relationship to it. And that's because you stop letting it make decisions for you. I can remember the first time that I raised my camera to photograph a stranger, I was scared shitless. I was like, oh my God, what if this dude just beats the brakes off of me? What if he's super upset with me? And all of the worst things that you could possibly be thinking about that I'm sure you're thinking as well. What if he yells at me? What if it causes a scene? What if he feels disrespected? What if he kills me? All of the things, that you're probably feeling in your head. I think I circled him for like 4 minutes waiting just to see what would happen if he noticed me. If he didn't notice me, I was making sure that all of my corners were checked. I wasn't getting scoped out by anybody else. And then finally built up the courage to photograph him from like 10-15 feet away. It wasn't even anything crazy. It's not like I was like right here next to him, you know what I mean? And he did nothing. He did nothing, dude. That nothing happened. And let me be, again, the first to tell you that 90% of the time, that's what it is. It's all of this built up anxiety for nothing. That's like the dirty little secret of street photography and the anxiety that comes with this medium, is that really most of the time, people don't care. And when it does, it's almost never as bad as you're planning it to go in your head. Now, I don't want to disregard your fear here, right? This is a safe space. We're communicating here. It's a valid fear to have. But I don't think that what you're afraid of is actually taking the photograph. What you're afraid of is being seen. And that's because you're announcing yourself that, you feel as if, at least for me, whenever I raise a camera at somebody I don't know, it's an act of, I see you and I think that you matter. And that's a very vulnerable position to be in. And not everybody understands that. But in order to get through it, you're gonna hear me say this a lot this video. You just gotta keep doing it. You just gotta keep pushing forward. You're not gonna break through that fear factor if you're not shooting. It's repetition. You just gotta buck up. It's almost like a form of exposure therapy. Start with photographing the back of people's heads if you need to. Start a little bit further away. Photograph architecture, photograph storefronts, anything to get you in the general vicinity of feeling comfortable on the street before you demand that the street performs for you. Get people in the background, then get people in the middle ground, and then in the foreground. By the time that you start making images of people that are 3 feet away, your body has kind of started to build up the muscle memory. And then those mechanics become almost automatic. And so the anxiety that you have doesn't have anything to grab onto. It also helps to know what you're carrying into the streets with you. Gary Winogrand, one of the architects of American street photography, once said that he photographed to find out what something would look like photographed.
Often enough, somebody will come up to me and say, you're getting good pictures. And I don't know. I know that what I photograph is interesting. I haven't seen the pictures yet, you know. But hopefully the picture will be more interesting than what I photograph. I mean, if it isn't that, it doesn't work.
There's not a single apology in that. There's no permission seeking. He just moves through the world like he belonged in it, and that's because he did. And you do too. Dorothy Lang photographed Dust Bowl migrants who lost everything. Robert Frank photographed America at its ugliest and the most beautiful, and then published a book that made people furious. Henri Cartier-Bresson walked the streets of Paris, Mexico City, and India with a Leica and the confidence of someone who understood his presence wasn't an imposition, it was an offering. Basically what I'm saying is that you're in good company, so walk like you know it. Which brings me to the second question, which is, what do I do if somebody confronts me? Now, at some point, somebody's gonna get unhappy with you. That's just the name of the game. It might be loud, it might involve some choice words. You'll almost certainly feel terrible about it in the moment, and then usually just fine by the end of the day. But here's what I've learned over the years of shooting in New York and Savannah, Georgia, Florida, Kentucky, California, most of the time. If somebody has a problem with you, of what you're doing, what they really want is acknowledgement. They just want to know that you're a real person and not a surveillance camera with legs. Smile, apologize, say something like, I just really enjoyed the moment, I think you look great, pay them a compliment, but never laugh. If you laugh, people think that you're making fun of them. Offer to show them your work, so they get a visual of what you do. 9 times out of 10, that's the end of it. People want to be seen as human beings. And when you meet them there, the confrontation usually diffuses. Now, if somebody asks you to delete the photo, in the United States, in most public spaces, you're under no legal obligation to do so. But you've got a choice to make that's less about law and more about your morals and ethics. Now, I've met photographers that are gonna sit there and bitch and moan and cite their knowledge of legality. In my personal opinion, and in seeing this in other photographers, that just makes things worse. There's no surer way to take somebody from angry to furious by trying to big dick them with legality. My personal opinion, the way that I hold things, is if a person doesn't want to be photographed, then I don't photograph them. What the fuck do I need that photo for? Who are you? Okay, just move on to the next thing. I've never had to not take a photograph and felt as if that was my career defining photograph that I was going to miss out on. But I mean, I'm different too, because I'm also a photojournalist aside from a street photographer. And if I'm on the scene or I'm on assignment and you got, some asshat making a fool of themselves and gets in trouble and everything like that, I'm there on assignment. Yeah, I'm gonna take the photograph. That's my job. I'm under no obligation to delete those photos. But when I'm out just working for my book, when I'm out on the streets and I'm just photographing, if they don't want a photo taken, then don't take the photo. If they want it deleted, delete the photo. And never lie and say you're gonna delete the picture and then not delete the picture. If you're working on film, my favorite go-to for film, if there is a confrontation, is I'll take a photograph, maybe we have a confrontation and they ask me to delete it. I explain that it's film. My go-to is that it's film, I can't delete it. I probably didn't get the shot anyways. And then if I did get the shot, guess what? I'll just not use it. There's no reason to put yourself in that situation after the fact. That first makes you a liability to yourself. And then second, it makes you a liar. And the photography community doesn't need any more of those. Street photographers already kind of get a bad rap. especially with all of these people walking around fully assaulting people with flashes in their face. The second thing that I tell you is that after all of these years of photographing here in the city, from Brooklyn to the Bronx to Harlem and Queens and Chinatown, Midtown, every possible place that you could think of, except for Staten Island, I've been seriously confronted less than a handful amount of times. I've been working on my second book for 6 years, and in 6 years, I've had less than a handful of actual confrontations. But through each one of those confrontations, I learned something. Stay calm, be a human being, have good intentions, explain your intentions, be kind, be nice, and know that a photographer that wants to work in the streets that can't handle confrontation, you shouldn't be doing this type of work. My little caveat here, though, is that most of the time, people are just curious. Cute clip of Joel Meyerowitz saying everybody's curious. Go ahead.
Look at that. Look what's going on. Everybody's curious. I mean, basically, I'm photographing my own curiosity. What I'm curious about is what I take pictures of. And I don't know what I'm curious about until I get a photograph. It teaches me. I think you can only learn by standing out here on the street and experiencing it. Because what you find out is that you've got feelings about things. You're not sure where those feelings come from. The street tells you every day. Here it is.
People are curious. They want to know what you're doing. And it's not always a confrontation that's bad. Sometimes people are genuinely interested in what you got going on, what your work is like. You know, they want to be a part of it if they notice and they've never had their photograph taken before. So like some of the best confrontations that I've ever had out on the street have been extremely positive, where I got to learn more about a person after I took a photograph, and I got to make a connection with that person if I'm caught. I'd say that more times than not, those are the types of confrontations that I get into, is positive confrontations, where you're getting to maybe laugh about it or explain yourself or explain your work and pay them a compliment and tell them why you were interested in the moment or what was going on through your head, show them your work. It's great networking as well. I gotta be honest. People know your name after that.
Thank you. I appreciate you. That's perfect. Let's go right here too. Thank you, guys.
Yep, thank you.
Have a good one. 3, 2, 1. Linda, you're beautiful.
Thank you, sweetheart.
Thank you. Of course. Have a good one. Mwah.
That's how it is. Which moves me to my third question within this portion. Is it rude or invasive to take pictures of people without asking? Now, this is the question that gets to the real nitty gritty. You know what I mean? We're talking about real ethical core principles of street photography that have been discussed from the beginning of the medium. This is the sort of thing that really churns the butter of the anxiety discussion. And the answer to it is yes, but also no. And the tension between those two answers is right where the good stuff is. Now, there's something presumptuous, if you will, about deciding unilaterally that another person's face, body, actions, behaviors, private grief, and public joy belongs in your frame. And that presumption hasn't always really had the cleanest history, you know what I'm saying? Street photography is bound up within the history of who's had power, people that look like me, who's had the power to look, people that look like me, and who's been looked at, people that are usually not looking like me. The history of this medium runs through race. Obviously, you can watch this video right here so you can understand the racist history of photography. Class, gender, sexuality, in ways that if you're gonna call yourself a serious photographer, you should sit uncomfortably with the fact that all of these things have been perpetuated throughout the entire history of this medium. And you should do some research on all of the stereotypes that have been created through street photography, through photojournalism. I've got a couple videos that you can watch up on the channel. It's a long and strenuous history that hasn't always been too pleasant. But The great documentary tradition of photojournalism and street photography and what they have to offer when we talk about literally the history of the entire world and what we know about ordinary life within the times that we're no longer around for has all come from street photography and documentary photography and moments of candid behavior. We talk about Dorothy Lang, Walker Evans, Gordon Parks, come on, Diane Arbus, and Jill Friedman, and Vivian Meyer, and Joel Meyerowitz, Gary Winogrand, Fan Ho, and Daido Moriyama, kinda. He's a little bit more eccentric. All of these people made, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. You know what I'm saying? There's Harry Gear. I could go on for days and days. You can see the plethora of a library behind me. All of these photographers are just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more context out there for what's shaped the vision of history, and they've all come from street documentary work. When I think about some of the most prolific images in the world, I think about street photography. I think about William Klein's photograph of that Navy guy kissing that girl in Times Square after the war is over. These images are in history books for a reason. They're in museums, hung up on nice gallery walls. They're proof that something has happened, that people have existed in certain ways, what cities looked like, what people were going through during that time period without subjecting people to be present in that moment and actually documenting what's happening now. You know, there's a great debate between if Robert Frank is documentary photographer, photojournalist, street photographer. Selfishly, I'm going to call him a street photographer. That type of work couldn't be made any other way. Street photography, through all of its ethical intricacies, is a living proof of history and those within it. So the ethical question here is not, is this rude, but what's the intention behind it and what's done with it afterward? A photograph made to humiliate, to exploit, to punch down on somebody that's already down, that's a different animal than the photograph that's made out of genuine wonder and appreciation and understanding the reality that people are living through. Context matters, intention matters, and your own willingness to interrogate both of those things honestly, without letting yourself off the hook, matters most of all. I don't exempt myself from this. I photograph people on the street every fucking week that have got no clue that I'm there. I believe what I do is valuable, and I carry that weight with me honestly. And I've never once felt like I had anything in my mind that said that I think this matters versus I get to do whatever I want. Hey, which is a great segue into segment number 2, which is the legality question. This group of questions is another big one that I get all the time. Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, so don't, I've done my research on this. I know my rights. But, take everything here and then do your own research with it. So, question number 1. Is street photography legal? Do I need permission to photograph someone in public? In the United States, I know that there's different laws in other countries and everything. In the United States, everything is legal on public property. Full stop, period. I think this goes back to the anxiety part of it too. You don't really understand what you have legality to do. Anytime that you're out in public though, you're good. I feel like this sort of gets passed around through like awful Reddit threads and everything about talking about street photographers. The legal principle at work here is very straightforward. When you're in a public space, sidewalk, park, a plaza, a subway platform, public beach, public, you have no reasonable expectation to privacy. Now, this isn't like some sort of weird loophole or technicality, it's just the law. It's the actual fundamental principle of the First Amendment that's been affirmed repeatedly by multiple different court cases, basically ensuring that any photographer that's standing on a public sidewalk and is taking photographs, making photographs of whatever is visible on said public sidewalk, is doing something entirely protected by the Constitution of the United States. You, in all caps, do not need permission. You, in all caps, do not need a permit. If you have a tripod though, pretty sure that's a different thing. I don't know, I don't use a tripod. You gotta go check that out yourself. You do not, in all caps, technically need to explain yourself to anybody. Now, there are limits and they matter. Let's discuss them. Private property is private property, even when it looks public. Now, this can be kind of confusing to some people because there are public parks that have private aspects of them. And they're very specific. The atrium of like a shopping mall, the lobby of a corporate building, the concourse of a privately owned subway station. These are the places where the owner can legally ask you not to photograph in there and remove you from the premises if they so choose. Now, they can ask you to leave, and if you say no, guess what, buddy? You're trespassing. So you got to figure out the difference between a public space and a private space that looks public. Especially here in New York City, the amount of times that I've figured out that even though something is in a public plaza but is a private space, it's incredible. There's a lot of things here that are very intricate. Obviously, there are also contexts like courthouses, certain government facilities, active crime scenes, military whatevers. These are places where photographers that are not a part of the press are not allowed to go. They're restricted to go, obviously. But a person out on the street going about their day, yeah, fair game. You can photograph them. You've always been able to photograph them. Think about Ouija. If you don't know who Ouija is, look up Ouija. Ouija photographed murder scenes and nightclub raids for the New York tabloids in the 1930s and 40s. He had a speed graphic and a flash bulb the size of a tennis ball. Now, this is more of a personal gripe than anything else. It's just something, you know, I doubt that anybody that's watching this isn't trying to become a photographer or is already an active photographer. So I feel like they're going to understand it. If you're not, and you're just watching this for the first time, welcome to the channel. Hey, how you doing? I'm about to maybe piss some people off with this. I understand the idea of not liking to be photographed. I get it. Totally understand. I'm on your side, actually, you know what I mean? But to think that somebody with an actual camera, right, is going to do more harm than the 50 bajillion ways in which we are already being surveilled, it blows my mind. The people that get upset about this sort of stuff, I just don't get it. You're clocked everywhere you go, buddy. What are you talking about? Anytime you step outside, there's a drone looking at you. Especially here in New York City, it makes no sense. You cannot live a life of secrecy here in New York City. I don't think that people realize that New York City is one of the heaviest surveilled cities, like, in the world. There are cameras everywhere. And anytime that you are out in public, I just go out into the streets with the assumption that I am constantly in the background of somebody else's video or picture at basically any point during the day. So maybe this is my public PSA to people in general. Don't get so mad at the people that are just out there trying to make cool artwork, and be more upset at the fact that you're being watched 24/7 through the screens of your phones and your computers and your smart TVs and your cars with your fancy GPSs, and each corner store and bodega and deli that you go into has 5 other surveillance cameras, and they can track you through your IP address and every single one of your social media platforms that you post your kids on every single day. Maybe be a little bit more upset about that and not the random street photographer that's just taking photos. I don't know. My 2 cents. Speaking of children, what are the rules? Second question here. What are the rules for photographing children? It's the same exact thing as adults, bro. Technically, anywhere that you are in public, you can photograph children. But here is another moral dilemma and ethical dilemma. We live in a world that is not so much like Helen Levitt's world that she was photographing in the 1940s, photographing here in Brooklyn and Spanish Harlem, taking pictures of children outside playing and everything like that. Again, legally in any public space here in the United States, you can photograph anybody doing anything at any time. Here's the thing, you gotta be very thoughtful. Oh my God, there is nothing more precious than the innocence of a child, and you have to be able to handle these sort of things with grace. Be thoughtful, be a little bit more obvious about what you're doing. You have to understand where parents come from. I'm fully aware exploitation exists. Predatory behavior exists, and parents have every right to be protective. If you're a photographer with a long lens, what are you doing? Photographing children from a distance without making yourself known? Yeah, that's gonna read very differently than if you're walking around openly through the streets or a festival or something like that, making photographs. Closer. Context, intention, and visibility matter enormously here. Now, in my own practice, I photograph children from time to time. Absolutely. They're a very important part of the history of this time period. And also, children are innocent, they're kind, they say everything, and they show their emotions in every little thing that they do. And it's not so much about the fact that they're kids, but more so about the fact that they're an integral part of our history and our future. If a parent approaches me, I show them my work immediately. These are the types of situations where I don't play whatsoever. If you want something gone, it's gone. I'll even take the roll out of the camera. They don't want their child published, their child's not getting published. Explain what you're doing. Show that the same thing about confrontation. This conversation goes up tenfold when you're photographing children. I will say though, again, some of the most beautiful conversations that I've had have been from photographing a child and having a conversation with the parent. And again, it really comes down to how you approach people. Are you kind? Are you showing that you have good intentions? Are you complimenting? Are you smiling? Are you, just interacting? And more times than not, like, the family will either follow you on social media. I'll get people's emails. I've gotten people's numbers, and I'll send them the photograph of them and their kids or of their kid, and they love it. They end up framing it. They send me photos of it. If you do these things correctly, I've never had anybody be upset after that kind of conversation. And if my gut tells me that a situation is ambiguous, I put the camera down. No single frame is worth having a parent feel as if their child is unsafe. I brought up publishing there at the end of that, and that's because the third question that I usually get asked is about publishing. And that's usually, can I publish photographs of people without a model release form? Now this is where the law gets a little bit more specific, so I want to be careful here. That's because it depends entirely on what you're publishing to, what you're selling and where. Editorial use, meaning journalism, documentary work, fine art, exhibitions, books, magazines, news, educational materials, generally does not require a model release form. For images made in, guess what, public spaces. That is the lane that street photography lives in. And it's been tested in court so many times by now, it's basically foolproof. A photograph published in a magazine that's a part of a story, a photo essay, maybe exhibited on a wall in a gallery of fine art, or sold as a print, typically doesn't need a model release form. And it doesn't require the consent of the subject. Now, commercial use, buddy, that's an entirely different story. If you want to license an image to an advertising agency, use it to sell a product, place it in a context where it could be constructed as endorsement, yeah, that's when you need a model release form. The moment that it's used to sell something, the subject's right to control their own likeness and use of commercially, that's when that kicks in. And without the signed consent of said model release form, you're looking at a nice healthy lawsuit. So the practical line to carry in your head here, fine art print sales and editorial licensing are generally safe. Advertising and commercial licensing, not so much. But there is one thing here that I want to discuss, and it's something that's not discussed enough. There was people misunderstand ethics and legality. These things are not synonyms in the slightest. You can publish an image that humiliates or endangers somebody and be completely within your legal rights to do so. The law sets the floor, and you have to decide where that ceiling is. I've made frames that I was legally entitled to publish before, and I didn't do it. And that's because the person that was in it was having a moment of private distress that just so happened to occur in a public space. And no legal protection is going to make me feel like a good person for doing that. The camera is yours. So is the decision about what you do with what it makes. Speaking of the camera, let's move to the next segment. The third segment is the one that is my least favorite to talk about. I can't lie. The amount of times that I get asked these three particular questions makes me want to go ahead and jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. The first being, what's the best camera for street photography? DSLR, mirrorless, film, compact? The correct answer here And it's one that you're probably not going to like because you probably heard it before, but it's just the truth, is the camera that you have with you and that you know how to use and that you like to use. I have seen magnificent photographs taken on an iPhone 6. I've seen technically proficient and immaculate photos taken on a Leica or a Hasselblad that had absolutely nothing to say. And that's because gear is the beginning of the conversation. It's not the end of it. And any photographer that tells you otherwise is just trying to sell you something. Now, that said, I know that that's not the answer that people want to hear, so I'll take it seriously this time and try and give you some recommendations. And it's true that the camera that you choose shapes the experiences of what you photograph and how you photograph. And the experience of what you shoot changes what you make. Now, DSLRs are where a lot of people start. Most people probably already own one somewhere. There's nothing wrong with that in the slightest. They're very capable machines. My thing is, it's just they're so big, they're loud, and they're heavy. And they're just so unmistakably shaped like a camera. It's very hard to be discreet with a DSLR. And just the mirror slaps on a DSLR. They're not very subtle whatsoever. It is loading up a 50 caliber whatever. I don't know anything about that stuff. It's like I'm pumping up a military grade shotgun just every time. Now, in certain contexts, that doesn't matter. Whenever I'm doing photojournalism stuff and things are high stress and everything, if I have my digital on me, I'll shoot that. But other times, especially in street photography, it's the difference between the frame that you made and a frame that you missed because everybody and their mother is looking at you because your camera is so big and clunky and loud. Now, mirrorless cameras, especially the smaller ones, the Fujis and the Sony A7Ss, I think it is. You know, like the newer generations, the micro, third body, whatever. These split the difference pretty well. They're quieter, more compact, and many of them have a more tactile, analog feeling control that make shooting feel a little bit more computational. I know for a fact that the Fuji X series has created this online cult following, specifically among street photographers for whatever reason. Maybe it's because the cameras are small and easily compact, and they look pretty unobtrusive. They've got those big word for Elmo, film simulations on them. And people love them so much that I've even seen people just shoot them straight out of the camera and not have to do any post-processing with them. Plus, not to mention these electronic sensors and electronic shutters and everything, they're silent, which changes the dynamic of shooting in a place that requires a little bit more not full-blown battalion walking down the hallway. But this is gonna be another hot take, unfortunately. If you've been working in the photography industry for enough time by now, Fuji and Sony both, they've got a very particular look to them. I can kind of like leave it at that. Basically, I know when a photograph was taken with a Fuji film, and I know when a photograph was taken with one of those Sonys. Something about them is incredibly sharp, yet somehow a little bit like looking through jelly. They're very smooth. And there's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? There's nothing wrong per se with that. Almost sometimes the photographs don't really look like reality. I said it, I'm sorry. Just if you've been working in this for a while now, you can't tell me that you can't tell that these photographs were taken on a Fuji or a Sony. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm just saying they all look suspiciously alike. And hey, if that's your shit, by all means, go for it. But for me personally, it just takes me out of the photograph almost immediately. I don't know. Compact cameras. Hey, how you doing? I didn't forget about you. Let's talk about a Ricoh. Never shot with one, heard real good things about it though. I'd love to get my hands on a Ricoh, honestly. Ricoh! How you doing? Ricoh, if you're listening, I'll make a whole entire video about shooting with your camera. Other compact cameras. Let's name the Contax T2. Sony RX100. the Sony T-Rex 100 RAR. All of these cameras are worth taking seriously. I think what I've been seeing is the Ricoh GR. It's taken another kind of cult following to it. I always see these comparison photos between the Fuji X series stuff and the Ricoh stuff. And the Ricoh has kind of become something close to the definitive street photographer's camera. Almost like it's become an entire tool for an entire generation. I know it's pretty small, fits in jacket pockets, shoots a 28mm fast lens, has a really good snap focus, lets you preset your focus distance for zone focusing and such. And I've heard that you can fire on it without any sort of autofocus lag or anything. So I don't know, I haven't shot with it, but it sounds like it's a very efficient camera. So again, Ricoh, how you doing? If you want to send me a camera to try out, I'll even send it back. You don't got to get it to me forever. I'd love to try it out, get my little hands on it. And then let's talk about my favorite, which is film in the most non-pretentious way, because I have shot on digital for a lot of my career as much as I have. Film is where I live. I do so much film. I am one of those snobby film people that people love to call me. I'm not. You can shoot on whatever you want. Like I said at the start of this, a camera's a black box. I just like film. I've talked about how much I like film in a couple different videos. It's usually for the reasons that most people don't like film, which is physical aspect of it. I love having an archive. I like the physical aspect and creating a collaboration between a lab and I've talked about it 50,000 fucking times. So you got 36 exposures if you're working with the 35mm film. You can go as low as 10, 8, 12, 24 frames, all the shenanigans. Basically, what I'm saying is that you can't machine gun your way through a scene.
I would rephrase that one.
Yikes, brother. You can't burst through a scene. You have to decide, and that constraint that kind of comes in with not being able to see the back of your camera and having to wait a week for your film to get back to you. All of that stuff sort of feels like a limitation at first, but eventually once you get through it, it really helps you grow as a photographer. The honest answer about what you should use when you're out on the streets is something small enough that you'll actually carry it, something fast enough that won't make you miss the moment, and something that feels good enough whenever you hold it in your hands that makes you want to keep taking pictures. Everything else is secondary, but I'm going to tell you what I shoot with because people ask me all the time. Let me start off here. Why so many cameras? So I carry 3 cameras around with me at all times, maybe sometimes more if I'm feeling a little bit froggy. Canon F1. That one's got a 35mm lens on it and a speed finder attachment. Nikon F4 that's got a 24mm lens. And then a Rolleiflex 3.5F, which is my medium format camera. Each one of those cameras serves a different purpose. One has black and white film, one's got color film, the other one's got a whatever I feel like. Each lens has a different purpose. I don't shoot all of them like sporadically. Each one is shot one at a time. So I'll fill up a roll on the Nikon F4, and then I'll fill up a roll on the Canon F1, and then you get what I mean. Each one has a different purpose. I like working that way. I've come to the conclusion that I really like these cameras just through the use of them. I don't really know why, I just enjoy using them. Am I open to trying new things? Yeah, I'd love to. But right now, that's what works for me. Now, I do think that everybody that takes this art form seriously, especially with this whole entire fucking video is about street photography. So if you want to take street photography seriously, I think that you should become proficient in using film. I'm not saying that you got to stick with it, but I just think that it's good education and it ties you back closer to the roots of street photography. But what can I say? I'm biased. Next question, Heidi Ho, should I shoot in black and white or color? Whenever somebody asks me questions like this, I get these all the time. I don't understand them. It's subjective. You got to learn both. You gotta shoot both. Both have a very long tradition and history in the medium of photography. I don't think that there's a correct answer, but the obvious correct answer is color. I'm kidding, but the choice that you make is much more consequential than you actually realize. Black and white is where the canon of street photography started. Little history lesson here. Henri Cartier-Bresson, one of my personal favorite photographers. I've talked about him in basically every single video that ever comes up about photojournalism or street photography. He is the godfather of street photography. But again, we can talk about Winogrand and Arbus and Frank and Versailles, Lee, Friedlander. These are sort of the foundational figures. Daido Moriyama, of course, black and white, William Klein. the list goes on. All of these people are like the foundational figures of the start of documentary photography, street photography, photojournalism, whatever you want to call it, mainly street photography. They all worked almost exclusively in black and white, and that's because that's all that was fucking around. But it's also because shooting in monochrome does something very specific to the way that a photograph is read. When you take out all the distractions of color and everything, what you're left with is what some people feel is a more purist form of a photograph. In today's world, what are you talking about? The people, oh my God, don't even get me started. The people, these purists of black and white that just think that a photograph can't be good because it's in color. Are you stuck in 1950s, 1940s? What's going on? Before the 1940s? What's happening here? There are so many amazing photographers. Harry Gearart comes to mind, Fred Herzog. We'll get there. You're getting me heated up. Basically, black and white, it strips all the information away from the image, and what you're left with is what's actually happening in the frame. Without color pulling your eye towards irrelevancies, the viewer is more so forced to work with shape and light and composition, geometry, expression. The frame becomes about structure. Now, color, my favorite, hey, how you doing? Nice to meet you, has a certain tradition and power within street photography as well. Joel Sternfield's American Prospects, shot on large format film across America. This was like 1970s to 1980s. It's one of the better documents of color photography and of the United States. I think about Joel Meyerowitz's Cape Light. Alex Webb has phenomenal color work in South America and Mexico. You can talk about color work without talking about Helen Levitt, William Eggleston, of course. Gordon Parks, awesome. I mean, Gordon Parks' color work is fantastic. Vivian Meyer's color work is fantastic. One of my favorite color pioneers was Fred Herzog, Modern Color. It's right there. That's Fred Herzog's book right there. Color to me is not optional. I love shooting color. It's my favorite thing in the world. My own practice is primarily color. I like to switch it up, but there's really only like a fraction of film stocks that are available to us in the modern day that all of these other photographers used to have, those lucky bastards. Kodak Portra 400, Ultramax. I love Fuji 400. Oh my God, I love Fuji. Kodak Ectacolor 160, Ectacolor 400, Ectacolor 800. You know, those are my favorite film stocks. But I think that the new photographer should do both. Shoot black and white, shoot color. Explore, see what you like, see what you don't like, and again, everything comes back to studying the history of photography and the history of this medium. I've said this now like 56,000 times. Go back through the history of photography and look at the most influential photographers for each form of this medium, black and white and color. Find out what you like, what you don't like, try and emulate it, then make it your own. Next question is, what focal length should I use? There's like a slew of focal lengths that people talk about whenever they're discussing street photography, and recently it's gotten a lot larger, but it always starts at 50 millimeter. Nifty 50 is what they call it. And each one carries a very different relationship to the streets and to the subjects within your frame. Each of them have something to offer and something that takes away. Now, there's been some debate though on whether the closest lens to the human eye is a 50 millimeter or a 35 millimeter. I think that it's I don't know. I'm not an optometrist, so I really have no idea. I'm not going to give my information on that. But I primarily work with the 50 millimeter a lot. I do enjoy the nifty 50. And I will say I do feel as if what I'm looking at whenever I'm looking through a 50 millimeter is more or less what I'm seeing in real life compared to a 35 millimeter. And so it makes it very forgiving and pretty intuitive. The spatial distance between subjects within a frame all feel very natural. They're just sort of true to life. Henri Cartier-Bresson worked notoriously with a 50 millimeter lens. Vivian Maier shot on her Rolleiflex 2.8F, which I think, if somebody's going to be a bigger snob about this, I don't know. I'm pretty sure that it's the equivalent to a 50 millimeter lens on there as well. I don't have a 2.8, so you tell me, buddy. And there's a reason why most photographers start at the 50 millimeter, and that's just because it feels most natural. It's definitely where I started. And that's because it kind of asks you to look at the world rather than imposing a particular kind of vision. But I will say, in terms of street photography, especially if you're not using like a automatic camera or you don't have autofocus and everything like that, 50 millimeters can be much more unforgiving than like a 35 millimeter, or I go and I shoot my 24 millimeter lens. These things, like the 24 millimeter lens is so forgiving, especially with the kind of work that I do. We'll get into it later. But the 50 millimeter is a little bit harder to focus sometimes, and it's a lot harder to zone focus as well. Now, the 35 millimeter, this widens the frame a little bit, you know what I mean? This is when you start introducing context. You get more of the street, you get more of the scene. Joel Meyerowitz, Gary Winogrand, they both work notoriously with 35 millimeter lenses. This requires you to be a little bit closer to your subject. You got to think about your compositions a little bit more. A lot of street photographers use a 35 millimeter lens. It's kind of like the go-to staple for street photography. Most serious street photographers land here eventually. It's wide enough so that the environment creates context and still, like, you know, close enough to where you can actually see human emotion on faces. However, for me, 35 millimeter is like my least favorite of the bunch. I don't know why. I just feel like it's just like it's like the middle ground. Like, it's not giving me as much context as I like, and it doesn't let me get as close as I like. So I don't really use the 35 millimeter. I've got one lens that I use that I try and slap on there every once in a while, but it's just not my thing. Now we could talk about the 28 millimeter, but I want to talk about the 24 millimeter because that's my go-to, right? That's what I shoot mostly on, is my Nikon F4 with a 24 millimeter lens on it. I love this lens, guys. This lens is just the piece de resistance to my work. Now, the 24 millimeter lens is an experienced street photographer's lens. You know what I mean? This is the type of person that's like me, that does not have much anxiety about confrontation, that does not mind and actually likes getting closer to people. This is not like the beginner's lens, and that's because it requires closer proximity to your subject. And you also have to understand composition. You have to be very aware of all of your surroundings just because it's a wider frame. So whenever you're doing wide shots, you really have to think about composition and lighting and color, because I shoot in color. Hey, how you doing? All of these things have to come into play. This is not like the beginner's guide to street photography. I think that Winogrand did shoot, I don't think he shot 24, he probably shot 28. He did shoot wider than 35 millimeter. I know that William Klein did, and William Klein's one of my favorite photographers of all time. Especially as I've gotten older, I've started to appreciate William Klein's work a lot more. His proximity to the people in it, and the fact that he wasn't afraid of confrontation, and he liked being able to have people interact and everything like that. As I've gotten older and understood this medium more and what I want my work to say about people, I've really started to drift more towards this 24 millimeter approach, because it makes me think my compositions a lot more and my subjects a lot more. So my actual advice to any new street photographer that's looking to get into this and wants to know about the focal lengths and everything is start at a 50 millimeter. My actual advice is start at a 50 millimeter until the streets stop feeling so foreign. Move up to 35 millimeter when you want your frame to have more room to breathe. And then if you feel up for it, you're feeling jiggy, you're ready to go, pick up a 24 millimeter, get in close, get in there. I'm talking about in it. But each of these things have different settings that you have to work with. So that brings me to the next question, which is, what should my settings be when out doing street photography so that I'm ready for the moment? I think that this answer is probably going to be one of the most practically useful answers that I'm going to give you throughout this entirety of the video, so listen up. The fundamental problem with street photography is that the world is not going to slow down from you. So that means that you have to be ready at all times, meaning that you have to know your camera like it is the back of your hand. I don't even know the back of my hand that well, honestly. I feel like I understand the front of my hand a lot more. I can see all my divots. I don't like that expression. You have to know your camera inside and out, what every single thing does. You have to understand where each button is, and then try and figure out how to use it ergonomically on the fly, right? If you are in the middle of trying to capture a moment and you're worrying about your aperture, your ISO, your speed dials, your shutter speeds, everything, the moment's gone, dude. You got to know these things before you even press the shutter. There are so many variables when out in the streets the last thing that you should be worrying about is your settings. If you haven't seen, what's that Stanley Kubrick movie? You gotta be like Full Metal Jacket with the way that they are with their firearm with your camera. You gotta know that thing inside and out. Now, let's talk about actual settings so that you get a better understanding of the way that I shoot and the way that I think about things. If it's bright and sunny out. Also, I'm gonna talk predominantly about film, that it'll translate to digital, right? Depending on what box speed you're at, meaning your ISO, whatever ISO you pick. When it's bright and sunny out, right? I'm talking midday sun, no clouds. There's this rule called the sunny 16 rule. I don't really ever shoot at f16 unless I'm using an on-body flash because my shutter speed is always at 1/1000th or 1/500th of a second at f8 to f11 whenever I'm shooting out on the streets and it's super sunny out. Direct sunlight above your head, right? Super bright, sunny out. I'm shooting a ISO 160 film stock, maybe 100, maybe a 200. Usually I'm at 200. So I'll set my ISO to 200, right? No overcast in the sky. I'm sitting at 1/1000th of a second at f8. That means that everything is going to be super sharp in the image because my f-stop is at f8, allowing everything in the background to be in focus. The shutter speed is at 1/1000th, so there'll be no motion blur. Now, here's the thing though. There's this thing called zone focusing, and it's very different for each lens they use, each focal length. We went through 50, 35, and 24. At 50 millimeters, zone focusing is a lot harder because it's further away. You can't shoot super close up with a 50 millimeter lens. Same rule applies for a 35 millimeter. I'm gonna take you through basically my entire setup. I'm just gonna go with a 35 millimeter for you guys. I guess I can go into each, but to start off, a 35 millimeter lens, you're gonna be at bright and sunny, 1/1000th, f8. Basically, I think what that qualifies as in terms of zone focusing, anything past a meter or 3 feet of you is going to be in focus, right? What that allows you to do is just look out in front of you and see that if it's 3 feet in front of you, that everything in that image is probably going to be pretty sharp. That doesn't apply to 50 millimeter lenses. The zone focusing system is further because the focal length is further, and you can't just get super close images like that. What you see in my work, right? If you're shooting at ISO 400 instead of 160, so 200 ISO, this gives you more latitude to shoot at a faster shutter speed or at a higher f-stop. In open shade or like overcast day, I'm usually still sitting maybe at 1/250th of a second, so you gotta be a little bit more steady, 1/500th, or if I'm feeling froggy, 1/1000th of a second with a lower f-stop. So something like f5.6, f4, and you can always bump your ISO. But for you autofocus photographers, you don't really gotta worry about this. This is more so if you wanna improve in your manual photography, which I think that you should. I can make an entire video on zone focusing if you guys want. It's a very important aspect of film photography and street photography. I just feel like there are probably so many other videos out there that are about zone focusing. Maybe not, I haven't really done the research on it, but I can like put one together if you guys really want me to. It's just that once you master zone focusing, you don't really have to worry about autofocus, because even on these digital cameras that I've shot on, sometimes the autofocus is still spotty. It doesn't get what I want all the time. Whenever I shoot with a manual focus. And I just know that my process works because of trial and error. The whole entire goal is to know your camera better than you know anything else that's going on within that moment. It's about creating less friction between what's going on and you taking the photograph. Every decision that you make in advance is a decision that takes pressure off of the moment of you having to get your settings correct and possibly losing the moment. So I would suggest working out your settings at home, just playing with your camera. So the next segment is all about approach and method, and these are the kinds of questions that I get asked. They're a little bit more philosophical and less so about the technical sides of street photography. And the first question is, should I ask people to photograph them or shoot more candidly? Now, of course, this is going to be very preferential to who you are as an artist. And depending on which one you go with, it's going to say a lot more about who you are as an artist. Now, the candid tradition is the one that most people think about when they think about street photography, the Henry Cartier-Bresson kind of vibe. The idea that life caught unaware reveals something that the posed life cannot. And I think that that's because when people know that they're being photographed, typically they perform for the camera. Their shoulders come back, they have a different sort of energy about them. They want to portray instead of just being within the moment. Like the private self steps back into the shadows and the public eye comes out front. You have to think about there's a reason why Gary Winogrand never asked. There's a reason why Vivian Maier never asked. But the approach tradition, the ask first mentality, has its place as well. In my own personal practice, I do both. I think that it's just very circumstantial in what I'm feeling in that moment. Typically, I'm using the Rolleiflex whenever I'm doing an approached moment. And this form has its own practitioners and people that are really well known for this. The first person that comes to mind whenever I think about this is Jamel Shabazz, and then another photographer by the name of Dawood Bey. He's got a great book called On Photographing Communities and People. And it's just sort of like a masterclass in learning how to approach people in the streets and how to get the most out of your subject. I also think of August Sander, who is like one of the most influential portrait photographers out on the street. Really great work there. Some people, like street photography purists that maybe just haven't done enough research on street photography in general, think that if you are approaching subjects and not shooting candidly, then that's not street photography, and that's just not the case. That's stupid. And I will say this, that like the street photography candid approach lacks a certain sense of intimacy. It doesn't really let you work a scene or work the people within the scene as much as the approach does. I think that one of the best parts about being able to approach somebody and, you know, show them genuine interest is that interest is then in turn given back to you and you create a relationship. This type of like approaching kind of work requires intimacy, requires vulnerability. It's all about making the other person feel seen and heard and getting them to drop that exterior wall that they're portraying to the rest of the world. It's a harder approach sometimes. Both of them have the things that they're challenging at. So the real answer is that there's no real answer here, you know what I mean? There's no correct way to go about this. There's only the answer that's consistent to the type of work that you want to be producing. What I'd caution against is defaulting to the candid type of photography because you're too anxious to go up and ask somebody for a photograph. The worst that somebody can say is no, for real. I've never had any other interaction except no. That's it. But what's important is to realize why you're making the choice that you're making. The work is going to reflect whether you know that or not. Second question is, how close should I get to my subjects? And I'm going to start off by saying a lot closer than you actually think. Almost certainly closer than you are being comfortable with right now. Now, this isn't like some macho man posturing sort of thing, like I gotta get in close. This is just the practical reality of what makes a street photograph feel more intimate, makes it feel more alive than just a snapshot of something in the distance. The difference between a great and successful street photograph and a mediocre one is more often than not just a matter of a few feet. 3 feet versus 8 feet. The choice to take one more step forward into the scene rather than retreating. Now, the physics of focal lengths are partially to do with this. On a 35mm lens, you gotta get in a little bit closer. On a 24mm lens, you gotta get in real close. You gotta examine your compositions. You gotta know how to create a scene and make sure that things flow well. On a 50mm, it's not as important because it's more general, but it's still important to be able to frame things up and get in close when you need to. The big thing is that you want to make street photographs that don't make things feel small within them unless you're playing with scale intentionally. Being able to see a human being, not just the outline of a human being, see their face, see their expression, their hands, the way that they carry themselves. These are the attributes that create a successful street image. One of my favorite photographers of all time, William Klein, I've talked about him before in this video, was photographed in New York in 1950s, around that area. He was working with what felt like a reckless sense of intimacy. He was so close to his subjects, bringing them into the frame and letting them be known. Not just shooting candidly, but also shooting with, I guess, a candid approach, but allowing the subject to see that they were a part of the frame. The amount of photographs that he has where somebody's staring directly down the lens is, I love that approach. These things didn't happen from 8 feet away. And then we think about other photographers like Bruce Gilden. I mean, he's famously known for photographing the streets of New York with that flash and everything, kind of the pioneer of intimate, close flash photography. Now, you don't have to work that close, you know what I mean? Like, these are some more extreme senses. I know that as I've progressed as an artist and as a photographer, my approach has differed a lot than when I first started off. Now I'm getting in there real close. But you should understand the physical commitment that's required to this medium, which is a sense of immediacy, of proximity and intimacy. My practical advice for people that I'm mentoring is I like to encourage somebody to, anytime that they recognize that they want to take a photograph of a scene, take 2 more steps into that scene, just 2, and see how it changes your composition. Maybe take the first photograph that you had at the length that you, and the distance that you had in mind, and then after that, take 2 more steps forward if you can. You do this enough times, and then the idea of having to get in close becomes more of a unconscious act, and your body just sort of does it. Which brings us to our next question, which is one I get, every single one of these I get a lot, I don't know why I keep saying that, but it's one that's kind of perpetuated throughout the entirety of the medium, and is, do I need to be invisible, or can I be present and acknowledged? Now, like I said, this has been a long-standing debate between street photographers for a really long time. There is a certain sort of stereotype about the invisible photographer. And I think that this was heavily perpetuated by Henri Cartier-Bresson. The idea is something like, you know, a photographer shouldn't impose themselves. They should be like a ghost and in and out, move through the world without disturbing it, you know, these sort of sentiments. Everybody talks about Henri Cartier-Bresson when it comes to this, but he wasn't invisible. He was just a French dude that moved like a photographer. The camera was on his face constantly. To say that people didn't know that he was there would be false. But what he was unbothered by the fact. And that's a different thing entirely. I don't think that he was hiding. I think that he was just so comfortable with the fact of making photographs that his presence just sort of read as natural. And then people just sort of adjusted to that around him. The photographers that try and act invisible are the ones that make the general public feel like they're conspicuously trying to be covert. You know, the sort of half-crouched approach and looking vaguely in somebody else's direction and raising the camera up real quick and putting it back down. That looks sketchy. It reads off like you're somebody that knows that they're doing something that they should feel guilty about. And people can pick up on that. I think that that's when the type of confrontations happen that can get a little bit more aggressive, is when you just look weird, you look sketchy. What actually makes you unobtrusive is not hiding things, but just acting natural. Letting the camera be an extension of your body rather than a tool that you're aiming at people. You know, making photographs the way that people walk, the way that people talk. Continuous, natural. You don't gotta telegraph each step. And sometimes the best thing that you can do, in my personal experience, is be fully present. Be acknowledged. I just talked about this with William Klein, but his approach is very much that way. Like, being able to know that that person was within the frame. You guys make eye contact, maybe you smile, maybe you talk for a second. Having that relationship with the person that you're photographing, even if it is candidly, it's just like, it sometimes just makes better pictures. It's like something that was passed between us, between the camera. Being seen and then remaining to be calm and continuing the work, that is its own skill in and of itself. So the goal here is not invisibility. The goal is belonging. And it's maybe like the New York stuff, you know? It's like you gotta walk with a certain sense of confidence. You gotta talk with a certain sense of confidence, like you're supposed to be there. Because you are supposed to be there. You're allowed to be there. So, you know, stand with your shoulders back. Be a little bit more confident in who you are and what you want to do. The next question is, how long should I be somewhere? How long should I spend in one place versus moving? Now, there are 2 schools of thought when it comes to this. It's called hunting and then fishing. The choice between the 2 is less about which one is better and just more so another kind of philosophical question about the kind of work that you want to produce. So let's talk about the hunt. The hunt is for the photographer that's walking around all day long, where they're just being a part of the street, going with the current, and just kind of waiting for things to pop out at them, to be anticipatory. following your instincts a little bit more and letting things pass through you. So in my own practice, this looks like usually I'm a big hunter, right? I do both, and I'll get there, but like for the most part, I'm hunting. So I start off on 145th Street, either the west side or the east side. In Harlem, I'll walk all the way down through Midtown, and then I'll go into the Lower East Side, make my way down to Battery Park. Maybe I'll walk across the bridge. I'm walking everywhere. I'm making frames as I go along, whatever catches my eye. And that's because the city at walking pace just creates a different relationship with the work. Now, here's the thing, though, is that as I've gotten older and in this practice more, I really got to be more intentional when I'm out hunting, because I don't want too many photographs that make it feel like people are just walking. I think that that's another problem with like new street photographers, is that the frames can get a little bit repetitive because it just looks like people walking by you, which is why I started fishing a little bit more. So now fishing is you sit at a nice corner, right? So I've got a few different corners that I sit on throughout the city. One of my favorite corners is 42nd Street in Bryant Park, right there by the public library. At the end of the day, it's got beautiful sunlight. You got a four-way intersection right there. It's got a light post behind you that's got one of those electrical boxes so I can rest my back on it. I'm kind of hidden from people walking across the intersection. So my practical advice is do both and understand the differences between them. Notice what each one does to your seeing. On any given day, spend the first half of the day walking around wherever you're at. And then on the second half of the day, park it at a curb, park it at an intersection, and just wait for things to come to you. Stay for 45 minutes, an hour if you can stand it, and let yourself get bored. Especially here in the city never runs out of things to show you. You just got to be perceptive enough to look at them. Which brings me to our next segment of questions, which is finding locations and subject matter. Big question I always get is, where do I even go to do street photography? Anywhere people are. That's the complete answer. The question of where to shoot is really two different questions collapsed into one. Where do I go to find photographs? Or where do I go to find my photographs? The images that belong to my particular type of seeing. The first question is very easy to answer, like I just said. That's really like anywhere, you know? But the second one takes years and years to be able to fully understand what is your own visual language. In New York, the obvious answers are obvious to me because they're good for a reason. Things like subway stations or 5th Avenue is always good. 6th Avenue, 125th up in Harlem if I'm walking through El Barrio. 3rd Ave up in the Bronx. There's Flushing in Queens. There's like near the Barclays Center in Brooklyn. Dumbo. You know, all of these places are good because they've got a lot of life around them. I guess like for the new photographer, the best places that you can go, like farmers market, could be one of those big food hall markets, especially here in the city. They're everywhere, where they close off the streets. People are having a good time. It's packed and busy. Nobody's really paying attention because they got like these $12 fucking lotes and everything like that. Like, these are optimal places to make photographs. The next is public celebrations, so like parades. These are all real easy spots to get into street photography. If you're looking to get into it and haven't really, had the opportunity yet, and you want to build up that confidence, places like public events are very, very easy to get your start at. But beyond the obvious answers, making a compelling photograph is less about what you are seeing in front of you and more about how closely you're paying attention to it. How long you're willing to look at something that isn't necessarily the most grandiose. Location matters, but attention matters more. The photographer that goes to all the right places but photographs quickly will always be outmade by the photographer who goes somewhere ordinary and looks deeply. My advice is just go to places that people live their actual lives, not put on a performance, not where they go to be seen. Which brings me to my next question of, does it need to be a big city, or can I do it in a small town? This is the one that just blows my mind every time that somebody asks it, because they almost always ask me, or they tell me, oh, it's so much easier to make good photographs in New York City. Duh, it's New York City. But I've made really compelling, at least I think, I've made images that I like in the middle of Kentucky. I've made images that I love in Savannah, Georgia, in Florida, in California. The phrase street photography it's not good at encapsulating what this medium is. Gary Winogrand's talked about this. Insert that clip right here, please.
I hate the term. I think it's a stupid term, street photography. I don't think it makes any, it tells you anything about a photographer or work, in a way.
Winogrand maintains that the problem in photography doesn't consist of taking a pretty picture. It's to find a way to transform the real world into something completely different, into a distinct image.
I think the best practitioner of this type of idea is Robert Frank when he was constructing The Americans. It's published in 1958 in small towns and highway diners, roadside churches, segregated waiting rooms across the country. And the America that Frank was interested in wasn't the America of just New York or Los Angeles. It was the America of Butte, Montana, Gallup, New Mexico, American South, at like this real brutal historical moment in the mid-1950s. What small towns in mid-sized cities allow you to do is become more attentive to the things around you because you have the opportunity to slow down. In New York, there is visual information being slammed into your irises at all times. It can be very overwhelming. The inner dialogue while shooting here in New York City is always, what should I place my attention towards? When you live in a small town or a mid-sized city, it's so much easier to become attentive of the world around you, which gives you the opportunity to be thorough in your examination of what would make a compelling image. So where you're at geographically is not the obstacle. The obstacle is your willingness to look at what's in front of you truthfully and completely. The next question is, how do I find interesting scenes instead of just people walking? Like I just talked about, like as you start off in photography and you look back at your archive later on, you're like, this is just a lot of people fucking walking around. Now, I'm not saying that this is not a bad photograph, so to speak. There have been plenty of very influential photographs of people just walking, of course. So that said, I understand what the question is asking, and it's a good one. It's more so asking how to develop an eye for the organizing principles that turns people from just walking into an interesting composition that reads as artwork. Making images that don't just kind of feel like visual noise. I think that the first answer is light. Now, I'm not really that big of a person about, you really gotta construct the image only if there's beautiful light out. I think that I used to think this way. Of course, light is one of the principles of photography. You have to understand it, but it's just like any other rule in photography or really any other medium of artwork. It's like you have to understand the principles and then be able to throw them away. I used to be much more conscious about like, oh, it's not good lighting, so I'm not going to take the picture. But the world doesn't work like that. The world is not going to always have the best lighting in the world. Interesting things are still going to happen, so you got to make sure that you're able to capture them even when things aren't like glorious looking. That being said, it's important to understand light, especially if you're just starting off. So starting off by, creating compositions that have something to do with an understanding of light is helpful. The second one is the one that takes a little bit longer to understand. And I think that it's juxtaposition. When I think about what makes an interesting image, a lot of the times it's context, it's subject matter, it's emotion, and a form of juxtaposition. Whether that be like I've got this one photograph of this guy that is obviously very affluent. He looks like a five-eye old man, looks like he's been working in finance his whole entire life. Nice tie, nice dress up stuff. And then right behind him is an unhoused person asking for money, stuff like that, like these sort of juxtaposing things about life are, I think, what creates a compelling story for the image and what makes people sit with an image even longer. It's just that this kind of seeing can't be taught directly, you know what I mean? These are things that have to happen when you're out in the streets and you're present and you're being exposed to things like that. And eventually you'll get there, but it is really just all about exposure. So, you know, if you're just starting off, look for light, look for geometry, subject matter, juxtaposition, things that don't really belong together, but somehow they do. And look for a long time, you know, be in the same places until you start realizing what makes those places special. So the next topic of discussion is developing your own style, right? That's always going to be one of the most prominent things that every new photographer wants to understand, is how to develop their own style. And I think that the first important question that I get often is, how do I know if a photograph is actually good? Now, here is the fun part. You mostly don't. You don't know right away. And the sooner that you make peace with that uncertainty, I think that the easier this process is going to be. One of the books that I always recommend is Heart of the Photograph by David Duchovny. I read this years and years ago, and I think that it was probably one of the most influential books on helping me not think about if a photograph is good or not. Basically, one of the premises that he talks about, I think it's within the very first chapter, about the difference between the artist's good and the viewer's good, and about how when you put an image out into the world, it's no longer up to you whether a photograph is good or not. Any interpretation or any intention that you had, you have to let go of, because photograph is going to mean something to somebody else than it does to you. I think that the thing about learning if a photograph is good or not is that it requires time away from the product or the final image that's really unlike any other form of artwork. A musician can hear if something is good immediately, right? Like a painter understands that a painting is good almost immediately. A writer can write down a paragraph or a sentence and feel in the moment that that was a good paragraph or a good sentence. But a photographer that just made a frame is the worst possible judge on deciding whether or not that image is good. And that's because the way that we work as street photographers, we work off of human connection and the people around us and the energy within that moment, or at least we should be doing that. The sort of adrenaline of the decisive moment can cloud our judgment on whether or not an image is good or not. And that's because all of the emotional residue that we have of the energy of that moment that we press the shutter still kind of resides when we're looking over the photograph. Meaning that you think that the photograph is amazing, or you feel really good about it because the experience of taking that photograph felt good. And that's why I think you can watch the video here, why I like film photography so much, or my argument for film, why everybody should shoot film. Shooting film helps make you a better photographer in the way that sometimes digital just can't, and that's because of a couple things. One is the fact that you don't have an LCD system on the back that allows you to check your frames every single time. Of course, you can negate this while shooting digitally, but I go into detail in it here. You can watch the whole thing. And then two is the turnaround time between taking the picture and then receiving that picture back. You know, most labs take a few days or maybe a couple weeks depending on where you go. And so the emotional residue of the image kind of subsides by the time that you get your image back. This allows you a certain sense of clarity, a more objective truth to the moment, rather than feeling that sort of adrenaline of being within the moment out on the streets. But for me personally, by the time that I'm looking at a contact sheet of the photographs that I took a few days ago, all of that sort of energy that I was experiencing in that moment is gone, and it lets me become more clear and level-headed in the decisions that I make for sequencing. Now, digital shooters, of course, you can do this too. You can manufacture that distance. Again, I talk about it in the video, but it's just a lot harder to do so. And especially when you're starting off in this medium, I don't expect you to have that discipline. It's just unrealistic. As for what makes an image effective or quote-unquote good though, I think that the criteria is a lot less mysterious than what people believe it is. A strong street photograph tends to have one of these things or all of these things in abundance. Compositional clarity, meaning that the elements in the frame are arranged in a way that are cohesive, that tell a story, that are easy on the eye and allow the viewer to travel through the image rather than glance over it. Emotional content, meaning that, hey, is there emotion within this frame? Whether that be a person's face, behaviors, something that catches the viewer's eye and that they can latch onto and feel a connection with. Narrative ambiguity. This one means that the frame in question suggests a story, but doesn't always necessarily solve it. So this kind of goes back to maybe our conversation on juxtaposition, stuff like that, you know, like what brings the viewer into that experience rather than completing the whole story for them so that people can make their own interpretations, leaving enough unresolved so that the viewer seeks the answer. And last but not least, formal surprise, meaning something within the image, whether it be geometry, juxtaposition, lighting, composition, all of these things producing a sort of visual experience that you couldn't have anticipated if you were trying to describe the scene to somebody using words. The most useful test that I found is actually pretty simple. Does the image make me want to look at it for more than 3 seconds? Not because it's technically impressive, not because I remember as the photographer how hard it was to make the image, but literally just because something within the frame keeps pulling my eye back to it. The involuntary return of attention, the image that you keep finding yourself looking at, is sort of the closest thing that we can get to an objective standard when it comes to creating good images for street photography. I always say that you should study enough work of the history of photography and the street photographers within this medium. Find ones that you like, try and emulate them, understand what about their photographs make them quote-unquote good or legendary photographers. That way, when you're out in the street, you can be thinking about these things in the back of your head, and then go and throw it all out the window again and do your thing. While we're on the topic of learning from other photographers, let's talk about the photographers that I think that you should be studying, because I get a lot of questions about that as well. There are so many different kinds of photographers that you should be researching when you're trying to get into this medium. Every single one that I'm about to mention is just literally like the tip of the iceberg, okay? So I'm gonna go into detail in a few of them, but for some honorable mentions, we're gonna go with Dairo Moriyama, Stephen Shore, Jill Friedman, Lars Thunbjörk, I think is how you say his name, Gordon Parks, Fan Ho, Tony Ray Jones, Fred Herzog, Martin Parr, Alex Webb, Jamel Shabazz, Nikos Ikonopoulou, Harry Girard, Sabine Weiss, just to name a few. Now, I've brought up his name almost in every single segment thus far. Let's start with Henri Cartier-Bresson. You can't understand where we've come from if you don't understand where we started. We started with Henri Cartier-Bresson. The big theory of the decisive moment. Very well known as also one of the founders of the Magnum Collective. He's very well known for his geometric sort of very precise photographs when he's out photographing the streets of Paris and France and really all over the world. India, China, Asia, all over Asia, United States, London, everything. That's what he's known for. Then I've also brought him up, Robert Frank. We have to go from Henri Cartier-Bresson to Robert Frank because he created the Americans. I've talked about him before already, so I'm not going to bore you to death. One of the most influential, if not the most influential, documentary street photography publications that's ever graced the medium, point blank period. You should absolutely know his work. He inspired one of my favorite photographers on a photo shoot while he was photographing ballerinas. That would be Joel Meyerowitz. Joel Meyerowitz watched Robert Frank work and then immediately left his job and quit and became a street photographer. One of his great buddies is Gary Winogrand, who has one of the most extensive archives in the world of the United States. Super influential, one of the best to ever do it. You need to be looking at his work as well. Some really good books, The Animals, Women Are Beautiful, Public Relationships, and then his posthumous Figments. Diane Arbus, because she was really the first photographer to kind of photograph the ostracized communities within the United States at the time. LGBTQ plus IA community, trans community, the circus performers and the quote-unquote freaks. She brought all of that to the mainstream. Vivian Maier is one of my personal favorite photographers. Everybody should know her story about, nobody knew about her work until after her death, and she ended up having one of the largest living bodies of work documenting New York City and around the world, and I just think that her story is amazing and the way that she saw was amazing. We have to really look at Gordon Parks' work just because he was the first black photographer of Life magazine, incredibly influential. All of his books are outstanding. Everybody should be able to understand the way that he created a story and why he was so influential. Beyond these ones, I'd move you back to William Klein and understand that different sort of perspective of being super close. Martin Parr for his humor. Versailles, a surrealist photographer that documented Paris at night. That was very influential. Helen Levitt for her tenderness of photographing children in Spanish Harlem back in like the 30s and 40s. Lee Friedlander for understanding putting yourself in the image versus taking yourself away from the image. Daido Moriyama is one of my favorites just because he completely blew up what people expected out of street photography. He was a post-World War II Japan photographer, really known for things like the snapshot. He's got a really great book with Takeshi Hakamoto is who wrote it with Daido Moriyama. It's called How I Take Photographs. Very short, very, very informational. You should read that 100%. The method here is to not just look at these photographs, but to actually study them. Study them, study them, study them. What makes them good compositionally, whether it be lighting or subject, framing, timing, the difference between black and white and color. Try and understand what decisions produced these images and why these images are so influential in the first place. Educate yourself and read the monographs, not just looking at the photo books. Start learning more about how the artists live their lives. Personally, one of my favorite photography books that doesn't have a single photograph in it is called Interviews and Conversations with Henry Cartier-Bresson by Aperture. Fantastic book. The image, and what you'll come to find out if you've watched anything of mine before, I've said this before, but the image is the surface. The image is just the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to understanding photography. Understanding the world around you, the people around you, what makes a compelling image, being connected to the world around you, and experiencing that through a viewfinder. That understanding goes much deeper. And I feel like one of the best ways to help you understand this is going to be covered in this next question, which is how many photographs should I be taking an outing? I'm going to maybe be on the opposite side of the spectrum here, just because I remember very distinctly when I started university, we only ever shot in digital, and our job was to go out and take as many pictures as possible and, put in the legwork of understanding your camera. I think this is counterintuitive though. I think that this is how they get you to become a professional and less about an artist. So here's my opinion. I think that you should probably be shooting less than you think and more deliberately than you already are. But I can understand that the answer to this question is again subjective. It depends entirely on you. My personal philosophy is that, especially within the new age of digital photography and the way that we're learning photography now, that volume is the villain of vision. Again, I'm very aware that this is probably not a very popular opinion. I'm sure, I get DMs and emails from professors at universities and other teachers all the time that tell me that I'm wrong. But I went through all of this, you know what I mean? I've been through this entire process. I was on the back end version of receiving these instructions, and if that works for you, that works for you. For me, here's my qualm. Henry Cartier-Bresson, again, let's bring him up. The first 10,000 photographs that you take are your worst. I believe that wholeheartedly. The problem is that a lot of the teaching seems to think that you can just rush your way through that 10,000 and that miraculously, once you reach that 10,000 point, then you got everything figured out. The fuck, you do have everything figured out. I'm still learning things today, and I've taken well over 10,000 images. My qualm is that a lot of new photographers go out there and they essentially, they take like 400 images in a day. And it's good to be curious. It's good to be, active and wanting to take photographs. There's nothing wrong with that. But by the time that they get back home and they're reviewing over the images, they realize that they're having that same issue of, it's just sort of static. There's nothing visually gripping about these images. And then they think that, if I go out and I make all these images, percentage-wise, the odds of me coming back with a good image increase because my shooting increases. That's not how you learn. You're not going to learn that way. You didn't technically make those photographs. You just kind of ran through them. But that said, I am capable of understanding nuance, and I understand that maybe volume in and of itself is not the full problem. The problem is that volume without discrimination. Shooting constantly, I think this is it, is that they'll go out and they'll shoot constantly without any sort of mental engagement while doing so. They just see something for a split second, take the picture, and then move on. That's not how these legendary street photographers or more experienced street photographers work. On my best days out shooting, I'll maybe take 40. Sometimes if I'm feeling real froggy, I'll get up into like 2 rolls worth of film. But most days it's 1.5 to 1. Out of those 40 to 70 photographs, I'll probably only keep about maybe 20. So when I'm out mentoring or I'm doing a workshop or something like that, what I always tell people is give themselves an artificial restraint. Only if we're shooting film, you know, you can emulate this on digital by only shooting 36 frames and keeping it at that. But I always suggest creating an artificial restraint of only filling up 1 roll for the entire day. Those 36 frames are all that you got, meaning that each one throughout the entirety of the day has to justify itself. And what I found through working this way is that what you find is that constraint, which can feel very crippling at first, ends up doing something remarkable to your attention by the end of the day. You stop trying to photograph everything, and then you turn your attention towards things that are actually worth one of your 36 exposures. Which brings me to my next question, which is, how do I edit and cull my work without keeping everything? This is what I think is one of the hardest skills in photography, and it's developed last by almost everyone. The ability to edit your own work, the ability to identify what's good, what's not so good, what's mediocre, no matter how much you remember loving the moment that you photographed it, is the difference between a photographer and a person that just takes a lot of photographs. I personally think it's also the hardest thing about this practice. I struggle with this on a day-to-day basis as well. Being able to cull my work, to lay it out, or to make decisions on what I want to share with people, especially at this point. I've been working on my second book now for the last 5 years. I've taken over 20,000 photographs in 5 years. It's just so much for me to go through sometimes. And I'm working on creating that detachment and that level of self-honesty about what's good and what's not. But I still struggle with this. In terms of the immediacy of it though, this is my process. After a shooting day, I go drop off my film, takes me a day or so to get it back. I'll look through all of it, make a general pass, and then decide yes or no with the rating on Lightroom. 1 for yes. If you're thinking about maybe, if it's a maybe, it's a no. You just get rid of it, just don't even worry about it. After that, a first initial pass, I'll look back through all the yeses, cull through that again, and then I'll start making my editing processes of actual adjustments, whether it be tonal curves, exposure, contrast, all of those things on those images. Now, here's the thing that I'm looking for though at this point in my career. It's not so much about the technical proficiency or the perfect composition or the perfect lighting. It's more so about, does this image draw me into the scene? The standard that I've been telling myself now is, would I be comfortable putting this image as a representation of what I'm doing in front of some of my idols in photography? If I showed this image to Joel Meyerowitz and I said, this is what I made today, would it be a correct characterization of the work that I'm trying to make? Now, not every image has to clear that bar. That's a crazy bar to pass, especially when you're first starting out. And not every day produces work at that level. But I just find that holding that possibility in the back of my head, the way that I go through my images, that sort of imaginary judgment, keeps me honest in the editing process. The images that survive this process, which is usually quite small, it's probably about 5%. Those go into a working archive, sorted by date and location. Everything else gets moved to a separate folder of raw files. It's important to know that the photographers whose body of work are deemed coherent or powerful are not the ones that were made from the most amount of images. They were the ones that were ruthless about which images to keep and which ones to discard. So think about the editing process, the culling process, the sequencing process, your archival process, as if your reputation depends on it, because one day, hopefully, it will. Okay guys, that's going to be it for today's video. I hope that this was informational and maybe answered some questions that you have about getting into street photography and becoming an artist and working out on the streets. There's going to be a coordinating Substack article with this as well that you can check out. Yeah, I hope that this was helpful, you know what I mean? I hope that this answered some questions and you were able to get some insight into not only my own process, but also how to conduct your own. If you guys have any more questions, you can reach out to me via email or in my DMs or something like that. Yeah, that's really it. You can find me on Instagram at Jared Tapey. You can find me on Substack at Jared Thomas Tapey, The Creative Connection. Here on YouTube, of course, in my portfolio. If you're a film shooter like me and you go out and you shoot film a lot, and you're in New York City, you can check out Nice Film Club. That's where I get all my work developed. I have a great relationship with them there. I trust them with everything. You can use my code NFCJared for 10% off your order and development. Other than that, nothing else to really say except get out there, get shooting, have fun, and keep moving forward. I'll catch you guys on the next one.